He ruined me the first time he smiled, and the worst part was he knew it. I should have walked away from a man like him, but instead I stood there, trembling like a moth circling a flame that would one day burn me alive. Ethan Rivers wasn't supposed to be in my world. I was just an ordinary guy waiting tables in a downtown diner, surviving paycheck to paycheck in a city that chewed people up and spit them out. He, on the other hand, was a high-powered attorney with a reputation for winning impossible cases and a charm so lethal it could seduce a jury before he even opened his mouth. We met on a rainy night in Manhattan. The kind of night where the streets gleamed with neon reflections, where the storm made every step heavier but somehow more cinematic. I was closing up the diner when he walked in, soaking wet, his tie loosened, his jaw tight with something between exhaustion and rage. And then he looked at me, really looked, like I wasn't just some nobody behind a counter. "Coffee, black, strong as hell," he ordered, his voice carrying a roughness that hinted at battles far beyond the courtroom. I didn't know it then, but that order was the first thread in a web that would wrap around my life until I could hardly breathe. There was something about Ethan that night, something magnetic and dangerous. His hair clung damp to his forehead, his shirt plastered against a body that radiated power. But it wasn't the physical presence that caught my eye, it was the silence that hung between us when our eyes met. Like he was daring me to break it. I tried to play it cool, tried to be just another faceless server, but my hands betrayed me, shaking slightly as I slid his cup across the counter. "You're working late," I muttered. "You're observant," he shot back with a half-smirk, lifting the cup as if it were a weapon he'd been waiting for. I should have hated him then, too sharp, too cocky, too aware of the effect he had. But instead, my chest tightened, and I found myself stealing glances every time he sipped his coffee. And when he finally stood to leave, dropping a $100 bill on the counter for a $2 coffee, I realized this wasn't just another customer passing through my life. This was the beginning of something I wasn't ready for. The truth was, I'd never really let myself believe in love. Not the kind that could withstand the weight of judgment, or the cruel laughter of small towns that had already taught me what it felt like to be an outsider. I grew up in rural Ohio where boys like me learned to hide or to run. I chose to run, straight to New York, thinking I could vanish into its noise. But Ethan, he didn't hide. He stood in the open, unashamed, commanding every room he entered. And that terrified me, because while I was trying to stay invisible, he was a man carved out of fire, and fire doesn't go unnoticed. So when he came back to the diner the next night, and the night after, part of me knew it wasn't coincidence. "You're not from here," he said once, watching me with unsettling focus. "No," I admitted. "Does it matter?" "Everything matters," he replied, and his voice was low enough to make me wonder if he meant more than the words themselves. By the third week, I knew I was in trouble. He was dangerous, not just because of the secrets I sensed coiled beneath his perfect exterior, but because he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't let myself feel in years. The night it all came crashing down started with laughter. Real, unrestrained laughter, the kind that made my ribs ache. We were walking along the Hudson, the city buzzing behind us, the river shimmering like a mirror for the moon. Ethan had loosened up after a couple of drinks, telling me stories from his early years in law cases he'd nearly lost, clients who lied to his face, judges who played favorites. And then he looked at me, and his smile faded, replaced with something raw. "You don't know what it costs to live like this," he said softly. "What do you mean?" I asked, but he didn't answer, not with words. Instead, he reached for my hand, and in that moment under the city lights, I let him. It should have been the beginning of a love story, but the universe had other plans. Because when you fall for someone like Ethan Rivers, you don't just fall into love, you fall into their secrets. And his secrets were darker than anything I'd ever imagined. The first crack in the facade came 2 nights later. I was working a late shift when 2 men in dark suits walked in, scanning the diner like predators. Their eyes landed on me, cold and assessing, before one of them leaned across the counter. "You know Ethan Rivers?" he asked. My chest tightened. "Who?" He smirked like he already knew the answer. "Tell him Marcus said hi." And just like that, they were gone. leaving me with a chill that sank deep into my bones. When I confronted Ethan later, his reaction wasn't anger, it was fear. And seeing fear on a man like him was enough to unravel me. "They shouldn't have come to you," he muttered, pacing his penthouse like a caged animal. "This isn't your world." "Then tell me what's going on," I demanded. But he didn't. Not that night. Instead, he kissed me for the first time. A kiss that tasted of desperation and danger. Like he was trying to keep me close even as his world threatened to push me away. And I let him, because I was already too far gone. I didn't know then that Ethan's clients weren't just businessmen or corporations. Some of them were the kind of people you didn't cross, the kind who left bodies behind as casually as signatures on contracts. He was playing a dangerous game, straddling the line between law and crime, between justice and survival. And now, because of him, I was in the game too. But here's the thing about danger: it makes every stolen moment more intoxicating. Every touch feels like the last, every kiss like a secret too powerful to share. And no matter how much sense told me to run, my heart kept dragging me back to him. Even when I knew it could destroy me. I wish I could say I walked away that night, that I chose survival over desire. But the truth? I kept going back. Like a fool, like a man addicted to the very poison killing him. Ethan was fire, and I had never been warm before. The morning after our first kiss, I expected guilt to swallow me whole. Instead, I woke in his penthouse apartment. The city sprawled outside floor-to-ceiling windows, and felt something I hadn't in years: safety. For a few fragile hours, lying tangled in sheets that smelled faintly of him, I let myself believe this was real. That maybe, just maybe, I was allowed to want someone like him. But reality never lets you rest for long. I heard his phone buzzing before I saw it. A series of sharp, insistent vibrations on the nightstand. Ethan was in the shower, the sound of water hitting marble echoing through the bathroom. I shouldn't have looked, but temptation is a cruel god. The screen lit up with a name, Marcus, the same name from the diner. And below it, a message. Deadline moved up. Don't screw this. My throat tightened. I dropped the phone back where it was, heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. I didn't know what deadline meant, but it didn't sound like billable hours or a court date. When Ethan emerged from the shower, steam curling around him, I couldn't stop staring. His body was perfection: broad shoulders tapering to a lean waist, scars etched like half-finished stories across his chest. He caught me looking, smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, but when I didn't smile back, his smirk faded. "What's wrong?" he asked. I shook my head. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. And he knew it. The days that followed were a blur of contradictions. One night, Ethan was all tenderness, pulling me close, whispering confessions that felt like prayers. The next, he was distant, his phone always lighting up with names I didn't recognize, his jaw tight with secrets he refused to share. And yet I couldn't leave. Every time I tried, something in me pulled back. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, like I was the only person in his life who wasn't asking for something. Or maybe it was the truth: I didn't want to admit I was already in love with him. It all came to a head one Friday night. Ethan had invited me to a gala, one of those glittering charity events where champagne flowed like water and men in suits traded smiles sharper than knives. I didn't belong there. My thrift store jacket and borrowed tie looked laughable compared to Ethan's tailored perfection. But he held my hand the entire time, like he wanted the world to see. For the first hour, I let myself enjoy it. The music, the lights, the stolen glances between us. But then I saw him. Marcus. He stood at the edge of the ballroom, eyes like cold steel, watching Ethan with a familiarity that turned my stomach. When our gazes met, he smiled, slow, deliberate, mocking. I tugged on Ethan's sleeve. "Who is he?" I whispered. Ethan stiffened. "Not here." "Then when?" My voice cracked, but Ethan only pressed his lips into a thin line, guiding me away as if distance could erase the truth. That night after the gala, we didn't speak. Not in the car, not in the elevator, not even in his apartment. The silence stretched between us, a chasm growing wider with every heartbeat. Finally, I snapped. You can't keep shutting me out, I said, my voice shaking. If I'm in your life, then I'm in it. All of it. Not just the pretty parts you want me to see. Ethan turned away, hands braced against the glass window overlooking the city. His reflection stared back at me, fractured by the lights below. You don't understand what you're asking, he said, voice low. Then make me understand. He was quiet for a long time. Too long. And then he whispered, almost to himself, I should never have let you in. The words cut deeper than any knife. I felt my chest collapse, my vision blur. For a moment I thought I would walk out right then, leave him to his secrets and his ghosts. But before I could, Ethan turned. His face etched with something I had never seen before. Fear. They'll come for you, he said hoarsely. If you stay with me, they'll use you to get to me. I swallowed hard. Who? His answer was a name. A name that meant nothing to me then, but would soon mean everything. The Blackwell Syndicate. That night was the end of our illusions. Ethan told me pieces, enough to stitch together a rough picture. Some of his clients weren't just criminals, they were architects of entire empires built on blood and silence. He defended them in court not because he believed in their innocence, but because he was bound to them, trapped by debts and deals made long before I entered the picture. The Blackwell Syndicate was the worst of them all. Ruthless, untouchable, with roots so deep in the city's foundations that even the law bowed its head. And Marcus? He wasn't just some stranger with a cruel smile. He was their enforcer. You don't walk away from Blackwell, Ethan said that night, his voice breaking. You survive them. If you're lucky. I should have run. God, I should have run. But instead, I reached for his hand. I don't care about Blackwell, I whispered. I care about you. And for the first time since I met him, Ethan Rivers, the man who never let anything slip, broke. His shoulders shook, his breath hitched, and he pulled me into his arms like I was the only anchor keeping him from drowning. But love doesn't protect you from the storm. Sometimes it paints a target on your back. The first threat came 2 days later. A note slipped under my apartment door, written in blocky letters. Stay away from Rivers, or you won't live to regret it. I took the note straight to Ethan, expecting him to explode, to storm into battle like the warrior I thought he was. Instead, he went pale, his hands trembling as he crumpled the paper. This is what I was afraid of, he said, his voice hollow. So what do we do? I asked. He met my eyes, and the answer was the one I feared most. You walk away. But walking away was no longer an option. The next evening, as I closed the diner, I felt eyes on me. I turned down an alley, trying to shake the sensation, but the sound of footsteps echoed behind me. Quick, heavy, relentless. Before I could react, a hand slammed me against the wall. Marcus. His face was inches from mine, his smile sharp as broken glass. You're cute, he said, almost casually. Shame you don't know when to quit. Fear clawed at my throat, but anger burned hotter. What do you want from me? Not from you, he said, pressing harder against my chest. From Ethan. And you? Your leverage. In that moment, I realized just how deep I was in. I wasn't just Ethan's lover. I was his weakness, and the syndicate knew it. When Ethan found me later, shaken but alive, something inside him shifted. The charm, the arrogance, the lawyer's mask gone. In its place was a man consumed by fury and guilt. This is on me, he said, pacing like a wild animal. They won't stop until what? I demanded. Until they kill me? Until they break you? He stopped, meeting my gaze with eyes that looked more like confessions than promises. Until I bring them down. I stared at him, stunned. You can't fight them, Ethan. They own this city. Then I'll burn it down, he growled. Before I let them take you. And in that instant I understood. This wasn't just love anymore. This was war. And we were already in too deep. The night after Ethan vowed to burn the syndicate down, the air between us became heavier, thicker, charged with the kind of silence that feels like standing at the edge of a cliff. He had dropped his mask completely, now no more sly smiles, no calculated charm. He was raw, stripped, and terrifyingly human. But he was also relentless. I watched him spend hours on the phone, speaking in hushed tones to contacts I'd never heard of, names that sounded more like shadows than people. He tore through files, case briefs, photographs spread across the floor like a jigsaw puzzle only he could piece together. He was building something, but whether it was a plan or his own destruction, I couldn't tell. And the worst part? I realized I wasn't a bystander anymore. I was in this with him. One evening, as the sun bled orange over the city, Ethan finally sat beside me on the couch. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt wrinkled, his jaw rough with stubble. For once, he looked less like a lawyer and more like a man fighting for breath. "You should go back to Ohio," he murmured. I laughed bitterly. "You really think small-town gossip and cornfields will save me from men like Marcus?" His lips pressed into a thin line. "Maybe not, but at least you won't be standing in the line of fire." I turned to him, heat rising in my chest. "Do you get it yet? I don't want safety if it means losing you." For a long moment he didn't move. Then, without warning, he cupped my face in his hands and kissed me so hard it knocked the air from my lungs. It wasn't gentle, wasn't careful, it was desperate, claiming, a vow made in the dark. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine. Then God help us both. The first strike came quicker than I expected. We were leaving the Diner when a black car pulled up, windows tinted so dark they looked like voids. I barely had time to process before the back window rolled down and the barrel of a gun glinted under the streetlight. "Down!" Ethan shouted, shoving me against the pavement as bullets tore through the night. Glass shattered, metal screamed, and I clutched him like he was the only thing anchoring me to earth. And just as quickly as it began, the car screeched away, leaving the street littered with shards of my life. My body trembled, adrenaline roaring in my ears. "They tried to kill us." "No," Ethan said darkly, pulling me to my feet. "They tried to kill you." From that night on, there was no illusion of normal. Ethan moved me into his penthouse, despite my protests, insisting it was the only place he could protect me. The security was tighter than Fort Knox cameras. Reinforced doors, alarms that chirped at the faintest shadow. But even in safety, fear seeped into everything. I'd wake in the middle of the night, convinced I heard footsteps outside the door, only to find Ethan already awake, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. One night, unable to bear the silence, I asked him, "What happens if we lose?" He turned his head, eyes meeting mine in the dark. "Then they bury us, and no one ever finds the bodies." A chill ran through me, but I didn't turn away. Instead, I reached for his hand under the sheets, threading my fingers through his. "Then we fight." The fight, however, was nothing like I expected. Ethan wasn't storming into courtrooms or confronting mob bosses with cinematic bravado. He was meticulous, calculating. Every night, he pulled me into his world, showing me documents that linked the syndicate to half the city's elite judges, politicians, even police commissioners. "They don't fear the law," he explained, his voice tight. "They own it. That's why I've stayed close all these years. To learn where the cracks are." "And you think you can take them down?" I asked. His eyes hardened. "I know I can, but it means putting you in more danger than ever." I swallowed hard, my heart a storm. "Then let me be in danger. I'd rather die standing next to you than live safe without you." The look he gave me then was something I'll never forget, half heartbreak, half worship. It didn't take long for the syndicate to notice Ethan was moving. Marcus returned, this time not lurking in shadows but standing brazenly across the street from the penthouse. I spotted him one morning as I sipped coffee by the window, his gaze locked on me like a hunter watching prey. I froze. "Ethan, he's here." Ethan strode over, following my gaze. The instant he saw Marcus, his whole body tensed. He didn't flinch, didn't look away, just stared back until Marcus finally smirked, tipped his head, and vanished into the crowd. My pulse thundered. "He's taunting us. He's warning us," Ethan corrected. "And that means we're getting close." The breaking point came 3 nights later. Ethan and I were returning from a meeting with one of his contacts, a journalist brave enough to dig into Blackwell files, when we walked into an ambush. 3 men, masks pulled low, knives glinting in the streetlight. I barely had time to react before one lunged. Ethan shoved me behind him, moving with a precision that was almost terrifying. He fought like a man who had no choice, fists cracking bone, kicks driving bodies to the ground. But even he couldn't fight them all. One slipped past, grabbing me from behind, cold steel pressed against my throat. "Ethan," I gasped. He froze, eyes burning. The man sneered. "You want him alive? Drop the files." Files? My mind spun, what files? But Ethan understood. Slowly, he reached into his jacket, pulling out a thick envelope I hadn't even known he carried. He tossed it onto the ground, his movements sharp with fury. "Now let him go." The man grinned, shoving me forward before scooping up the envelope. And just like that, they were gone, melting into the night, leaving us bruised and broken in the alley. I collapsed against the wall, shaking. They almost killed us. Ethan dropped beside me, his chest heaving. "No, they sent a message." "What message?" I demanded. His eyes met mine, raw and unflinching. "That if I keep pushing, they'll take you from me. Permanently." That was the night Ethan broke. He paced the penthouse, pulling at his hair, muttering half-formed plans and curses under his breath. I'd never seen him so undone, so shattered by the weight of everything pressing down on him. Finally, I grabbed his arm, forcing him to stop. "You can't do this alone," I said. "You'll kill yourself trying." "And what then?" His voice cracked. "What happens to you if I fail?" I swallowed the fear clawing at my throat. "Then we fall together." For a moment, silence stretched between us, fragile and endless. Then Ethan sank to his knees in front of me, his hands trembling as they cupped my face. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "Maybe not," I said softly, tears burning my eyes. "But you have me anyway." And then he kissed Meslo, aching, filled with every unspoken promise we were too afraid to say aloud. The war had begun. And as much as it terrified me, as much as I wanted to believe love alone could save us, I knew one thing for certain. The Blackwell Syndicate had underestimated Ethan Rivers. And they had underestimated me. Because love doesn't just tremble. Love fights. Love survives. And love, once cornered, will burn the whole world down if it has to. The night we decided to end it all, the night we put everything on the line, was colder than I remember any New York night being. The wind sliced through my jacket, and every sound, every shadow, felt like a warning. But Ethan's hand in mine steadied me. We weren't just lovers anymore. We were soldiers in a war we didn't choose, a war we couldn't run from. The plan was reckless. It had to be. Ethan had spent weeks gathering evidence against the Blackwell Syndicate. Financial ledgers, recordings, testimonies from the few brave enough to speak. We had enough to cripple them, but only if the truth saw daylight. And daylight meant risk. The syndicate wouldn't let that happen quietly. "They'll come for us," I whispered as we stood on the rooftop of the safe house. The files ready to be delivered to the journalist Ethan trusted most. "They already have," Ethan replied, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with resolve. "But tonight it ends." It didn't take long for the trap to spring. We barely made it 3 blocks with the files before black cars swarmed the street, cutting us off from every direction. Men spilled out, guns glinting under the streetlights. And leading them was Marcus, his smile sharp, his voice like poison. "You should have walked away, Rivers," he sneered. "But you always loved to gamble, didn't you?" Ethan pushed me behind him, his arm a shield. "You'll have to kill me first." "That was the plan," Marcus replied smoothly. "But why waste a bullet when I can break you by taking him?" His eyes flicked to me, and I felt my blood run cold. What followed was chaos, gunshots, shouting, the thunder of footsteps as we ran through back alleys like hunted animals. Ethan fought like a man possessed, every punch fueled by desperation. I stayed close, terrified but unwilling to let go. At one point, Marcus cornered me, pressing me against the brick wall with a blade at my throat. His breath was hot against my ear as he hissed, "He can't save you. He'll never save you." But Ethan did. He tore Marcus away with a feral roar, his fists raining down until Marcus lay gasping on the ground. Ethan stood over him, chest heaving, eyes wild. For a moment I thought he'd kill him. "Ethan," I whispered, placing a hand on his arm. "Don't. That's not who you are." Slowly, painfully, Ethan pulled back. He turned to me, eyes glassy, and for the first time, I realized the truth. He wasn't fighting for justice anymore. He was fighting for us. We made it to the bridge just as dawn began to break. The journalist was waiting there, fear etched into her face as she took the files from Ethan's trembling hands. "This will expose them," she said, clutching the evidence like it was holy scripture. "But you'll both be targets now." "We already are," Ethan replied simply. As she hurried away, the first rays of sunlight stretched across the sky. The city stirred awake beneath us, oblivious to the war that had just shifted in the shadows. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. We stood there on the Brooklyn Bridge, battered and exhausted, the weight of the night still heavy on our shoulders. But there was something else too, something lighter. Hope. Ethan turned to me, his face softening in the morning light. "You should hate me for dragging you into this." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "I don't hate you. I love you. And I'm not leaving." His breath caught, and for a moment he looked like a man seeing salvation for the first time. Slowly, carefully, he reached for my hand, threading his fingers through mine. "I've spent my whole life fighting battles for people who never cared about me," he whispered. "But you're the only fight that ever mattered." The world could have ended in that moment, and I wouldn't have cared. Weeks later, the city was buzzing with headlines. Blackwell Syndicate exposed. Politicians fell. Arrests were made. Entire empires crumbled under the weight of truth. Ethan's name was dragged through mud and praised in equal measure. But none of it mattered. Not to us. We moved into a small apartment overlooking the park. Nothing like his penthouse, but more of a home than I'd ever known. Ethan left the high-rise firms behind, choosing smaller cases, defending people who needed him rather than those who owned him. And me? I went back to school, chasing the dreams I thought I'd left behind. Life wasn't perfect. We still looked over our shoulders sometimes. We still felt the ghosts of those nights in the alleys, the shadows that threatened to consume us. But we had each other, and that was enough. One evening, months later, as we sat on the fire escape watching the city lights flicker on, Ethan leaned close, his lips brushing my ear. "You saved me," he murmured. I laughed softly, shaking my head. "No, we saved each other." And then he kissed me, slow and certain, as the city hummed around us. For the first time, I didn't tremble out of fear. I trembled because love, in all its danger and beauty, was finally ours. Forever. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.